If you have a Bible with you, go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 19. We'll be there in just a minute. So this week, we are kicking off just a really short new series to wrap up the year as we lead up to Christmas, which is rapidly approaching. Precisely 24 days from today, in fact. If you have not started Christmas shopping, me neither, but we're supposed to start soon, is what I've been told. But with Christmas coming up really quickly, we wanted to take some time to just really focus in on one central element of the Christmas season for this year's series. So I don't know about you, but I really love the Christmas season. I really enjoy it. Having grown up in a country that does not really celebrate Christmas at all, being in America during the Christmas season just like feels like I'm in a Hallmark movie. It is so fun. I get to see like all the lights and stuff. It snows here sometimes. That's crazy. But it's really fun to like get to be a part of it. And I get really excited about it. Our son Jude is also at a really fun age where he's just like super excited about like flashy lights or like big decorations and stuff. So we like walk into any store where there's Christmas decorations and he just goes, "Whoa!" And it is so cute. It's fantastic. And while I love all of those things, and I love listening to Christmas music as soon as Halloween ends because there's no holidays in between those two. Sometimes I cannot help but feel like the entire Christmas season can unfortunately be distilled down to a few weeks that it's really some of the most stressful elements of people's lives are made even more stressful, is what it feels like sometimes. Our already busy lives and busy schedules feel even busier and even more hectic with travel plans and closing out end-of-year tasks and goals at work. Our tendency towards consumerism is amplified 100-fold, even with constant ads and constant pressure to feel like we have to buy the perfect gift to show people that we truly care about them. And we overhaul our entire living spaces. We redecorate our houses to show our Christmas spirit, right? We take all of the outside things and we put them inside. And then we take lights and we put them outside. It makes so much sense. We take all of our most sentimental, most fragile possessions and put them directly in reach of our toddlers. It is beautiful. But one thing that I think is particularly heartbreaking about the Christmas season is how it can unfortunately emphasize some of the loneliness and isolation that we feel as a society a lot of the time. So a study done by the health insurance provider Cigna back in 2018 really made it clear the reality of what has been called a loneliness epidemic is the phrase that they use. So the study found that 54% of people surveyed claimed to, quote, always or sometimes feel like no one knows them well. 46% said, quote, they always or sometimes feel alone. 43% said they always or sometimes feel as though they lack companionship, that their relationships are not meaningful, and that they are isolated from others, end quote. The study also made the point that according to health experts, loneliness has the same impact on mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's significant. And these are all stats 2 years before COVID. So just let that sink in for a second. Those are kind of startling statistics, I think. And it can feel really tragic because the reality is it is tragic that's the case for so many people. But I think what makes it feel even more tragic is that loneliness in many ways is actually the exact opposite of the message of Christmas. So as followers of Jesus, we celebrate this time of year the reality that God entered into the world as the person, Jesus, to reconcile a broken relationship between God and humanity. That is what we are celebrating. The message is all about restored relationships. And yet for many of us, this time of year especially, we're actually more aware of the broken relationships or lack of relationships that we have in our lives more than any other time in the year. But really, in a word, Christmas is all about the hospitality of God. That's the main idea of what Christmas is. So before we go any further, I think it's really important for us to take a second to make sure that we understand what we are saying when we say the word hospitality. I want us all to be on the same page because that's really what we're talking about today. So what is hospitality? I would say no matter who you are, you have something in your mind when you hear that word, hospitality. Maybe for you, hospitality makes you think of like a picturesque home straight out of HGTV, not a speck of dirt or dust to be seen, no sign that people even live there. Everything is in its place, it's organized, there's a full menu and agenda loaded with games and activities for an evening, engaging talking points so there's never a lull. That's hospitality. If everything isn't just right, it's just a flop. No one's ever going to want to come over again. You're a failure. Don't ever try. Maybe that's not you. That is some people. I know that for a fact because I've had that conversation many times. Now that might be entertaining, or that might be exciting hosting, or whatever other phrase you want to use. But biblically, that is not hospitality. That's not what hospitality means. In the Bible, the word that is translated hospitality time and time again is this word philoxenia. So this is a compound word. It combines the word philos, which means love, and xenos, which means the stranger or a stranger. So literally translated, it just means love of the stranger. That's what hospitality means. And actually, in its literal translation, it is the exact grammatical opposite of the word xenophobia. So that has the same root, xenos, which is the stranger or the outsider, but instead of being rooted in love, it's rooted in fear, right? So xenophobia is a fear of the outsider, a fear of those who are different from you, which comes with an inherent aversion towards or an avoidance of anyone that fits into that category for you. But hospitality, on the other hand, philoxenia, is the love and the welcoming of the stranger. It's the exact opposite of that. So I think a really helpful way for us to define hospitality so that we're all on the same page for our purposes would be like this. I would say hospitality is loving and welcoming anyone who feels like an outsider. I think that's how I would sum up hospitality. So hospitality is our response as followers of Jesus to the way that he pursued us when we were far from him. Hospitality is the way that we actively look around the rooms that we are in as followers of Jesus for the person that looks like they may feel like they're out of place. And specifically going and striking up a conversation with them to make sure that they feel seen. Hospitality is the way that you take initiative to introduce yourself to the person who shows up to life group for the first time, and the way that you see it as your personal responsibility to make sure that you follow up with them during the week. You try to get lunch with them, or you try to get dinner with them. You try to extend a welcome to them so that they feel like they belong. That's hospitality. It's the mindset that we have that understands that everything that we possess or that we have in our lives as followers of Jesus is ultimately not ours. Everything that we have is a tool to be used to make Jesus more known. So hospitality at its core it's not about entertaining people. Hospitality is about getting to know people. If you've taken our membership class, you have heard us say that. So in the passage that we're looking at today, we see a story about how Jesus shows some of the most impactful and incredible hospitality, I think, towards somebody despite having no HGTV for reference. He has no fancy kitchen. He has no real means of entertaining. In fact, Jesus shows hospitality to a guy without actually utilizing his own home at all, which is key because as best we can tell, Jesus was homeless. So it would be hard for him to invite someone over. But to show you what I'm talking about, specifically, let's hop into Luke 19. So if you're not already there, now's a great time to turn there. If you are, then we can jump in together. If you grew up around church, you are probably familiar with this story. If you grew up in Sunday school, you probably know a song that goes with it. I'm not going to sing it. Don't ask, because I won't. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to sing it. So you're probably pretty familiar with this. But I would ask you to try to put all of that out of your mind and approach this with a fresh set of eyes today. So we're going to jump in verse 1. So it says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Now, this is not vital information, but I find it very interesting. Not to throw anyone for too big of a loop, but scholars don't actually agree whether he, in this passage, refers to Zacchaeus being too short to see Jesus in the crowd, or Jesus being too short to be seen in the crowd. Whoa, that's crazy. So the jury is still out on who exactly the wee little man is in the song. But let's keep reading. So, yeah, Jesus, short king, there you go. So he, literally, verse 4. All right, we'll bring it back. So he, verse 4, this is Zacchaeus now. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So if you know the Sunday school song, you might think the commentary on people's height is the main point about this passage. It's not. It has nothing to do with that. It's just an interesting side note. The point of this passage is that Zacchaeus was a man in Jericho who was universally despised by the Jewish people around him. He was hated and shunned by his community that he lived in. That is the point of this story. So in Jesus' day, tax collectors were quite literally the bottom of the social barrel to Jewish people. So tax collectors in the Roman Empire, which is where they were ethnically local to the town in which they lived, but they were employed by the Roman government to collect a Roman tax. And so it wasn't just the fact that these people were on the oppressor's payroll that made everybody so mad. Tax collectors were actually given authority and the backing of the Roman government to set and enforce taxation in whatever way they saw fit. So if the Roman tax rate, for example, was 10% of your earnings, the way tax collector got paid was whatever amount on top of that 10% they decided to demand from you. And they had the full backing of the Roman military to support whatever they asked or whatever they said. So there was nothing stopping them from saying, hey, actually, this month it's 25% because I feel like it. And if you don't pay me, then some Roman soldiers are going to come up and they're going to beat you half to death and arrest you. And that was it. End of story. They could have people pressured, beaten, thrown in jail, whatever they wanted by Roman soldiers to take money from them. So this is like the modern equivalent. This is a bit of a stretch, but it helped me think about it. This is like if the IRS went door to door, demanding your tax returns in person while also charging you double just for the honor of their presence, and also they're your cousin, right? But they would prefer to get paid than be family, right? That's a tax collector. People hated tax collectors. They despised them. And since they were so universally despised in this culture, everybody knew the bare minimum was to keep your distance from tax collectors so that you wouldn't even be loosely associated with them. That was a starting point. So they were totally shunned by their society. This would mean that people like Zacchaeus, they would know from the moment that they walked out their door in the morning until they came home at night, literally everyone that they encountered, everyone who would normally be their people, were actively trying to avoid them. And if they did engage with them, they were actively looking at them and treating them with contempt and disgust. Zacchaeus knew that when he went to the synagogue, because he was a Jewish man, he did go to the synagogue. When he went to the synagogue, he knew no one was greeting him, no one was welcoming him, nobody wanted to talk to him. When he went to the market, he was not running into an old friend and catching up. People were crossing the street, walking the other way to make sure that they did not interact with him at all. He was shunned by the Jewish community around him. He was hated by the people around him. And in our passage, we can see in verse 5, Jesus sees Zacchaeus up in this tree where he went to watch him coming. Jesus knows who he is, and he knows his situation. He knows that he is despised and he is rejected by his community. And so what does he do? Jesus says, Zacchaeus, get down. I'm coming over for dinner. So Jesus practices exactly what we just defined as biblical hospitality, but without a house, right? He notices someone who feels like and is treated like an outsider, and he welcomes them into relationship. That is what Jesus is doing in this passage. And I think this passage is a really helpful demonstration of biblical hospitality for us because it actually goes above and beyond, in my mind, to challenge a lot of our assumptions. We can see clearly from this passage, hospitality has absolutely nothing to do with how impressive of a meal you can prepare. It has absolutely nothing to do with what part of town you live in. It has nothing to do with whether or not you have a big house, an apartment, a dorm, whatever it is. It does not matter. Jesus was homeless at the time. We've already said that. And he puts hospitality on display perfectly. Now, you can absolutely use things like your home or your cooking or your season tickets or whatever it is you have in your life. You can use the things you have in your life to practice hospitality, absolutely. But the only thing required for practicing hospitality is a willingness to see people and initiate friendship with them. That is what is required. So when we talk about this idea of hospitality in our daily lives, it can take all kinds of different forms. There are countless ways that we could put this into practice. But the core of it always comes back to looking for opportunities to make people feel like they belong. That is what we are trying to do with hospitality. This is actually one of the primary reasons for the 2 minutes that we have before our teaching every week. Some of you inherently love that time. That's great. You really want to connect with people. You want to have more conversations. You want to talk longer. Some of you absolutely dread it. And it's because it can sometimes be uncomfortable or awkward. And that's okay, that it's uncomfortable or awkward. That part of it's okay. Sometimes that is the reality. I will admit that. But the reason that time exists and the reason that we set that aside and hold so tightly to having that space is because we want to be able to provide dedicated space and dedicated time for intentionality with the other people in this room. We want to provide a concrete time and space for people to practice hospitality. We want everyone, we ask everyone to find someone you don't know and introduce yourself. That's not just because we want to say it or because it sounds nice. It's actually a perfect opportunity to connect with someone that might not be connected to anyone else in this room. They may not be connected to anyone else at all. But it's a good opportunity to connect with someone and initiate building a relationship from there by inviting them into something and by acknowledging their personhood. And you may be sitting here right now, and you may think, well, you do usually give a pass for people by saying they can go to the bathroom or they can get coffee or whatever it is else we say. And to that, I will say nothing helps dispel some feelings of awkwardness and discomfort like a little comedic relief. So that's what that's for, a little peek behind the curtain. But that's also mainly for newer people who may be here for the first time and may be like, what, 2 minutes, what? Normally it's like the half of an intro to a song and I have to shake one person's hand. So we try to do that as kind of an olive branch to people who may have never experienced that. But if you've been here for a little bit, maybe don't take that time to avoid others in the room. Also, if we're being honest and you go to the bathroom or you go get coffee, you're probably running into somebody else doing the same thing, right? You can both pretend to get coffee together and you can introduce yourself. It's great. But you might also be in the room. Maybe don't do that in the bathroom. I don't know. Feel that out, you know? You'll know if the vibe's right. So you may also be in the room and be thinking, okay, yeah, that's all well and good. I love that for the outgoing people in here. Love that for them. That's really cool. Extroverts love that kind of thing. I love that for them. but I'm really introverted, and I would really prefer to not really talk to anyone ever, especially right now. Honestly, it's probably best for everybody if I don't, because I'm super awkward, feels weird. If the goal is making people feel welcome, I'm actually doing you a favor by staying out of it. So I'm not going to do it. I need to be really honest with you guys for a minute. I am incredibly introverted. I am like the textbook introvert if you read all the personality tests that you can do. People who know me really well, not super surprised by that. But a lot of people tend to be kind of taken aback by it when I tell them that. I have a very forward-facing job. I am on stage every week in one capacity or another in front of hundreds of people. I have conversations with a lot of people in this room. I lead a life group. I'm with people a lot. I have meetings with people all throughout the week. I am constantly engaging with people. And I love being able to do that. I love connecting with people. I love talking with people. I love engaging with people and getting to know them. And to be totally honest, it is incredibly difficult for me to do. And it is very tiring for me to do, because that is not my natural bent. And I think it's super important for people to know themselves well. I think it's really important for you to have a high level of self-awareness. It's fantastic to know your own tendencies and your own propensities. It's great to know the things that you are naturally bent towards and the things that you feel averse to. It's really hard to get to know other people if you first don't know some things about yourself. So I think that's great. But the ministry of hospitality is a calling on all followers of Jesus, not just the extroverted ones, okay? That is something that we have to keep in mind. There's an author named Rosaria Butterfield. I'm going to talk more about her in just a minute. But she has a quote about this, specifically this dynamic. And she says, knowing your personality and your sensitivities does not excuse you from ministry. It means you need to prepare for it differently than others. And I hate that quote. Because, man, does it cut right in my feels. Because that is how I feel a lot of the time. It's like, I get a pass because I don't want to do it. But that's not what that means. And it also means that you don't just need to prepare for it differently. You probably need to approach it differently than other people. And that can look a lot of different ways. So, for example, if you are an extremely introverted person in this room and you cannot stand the thought of initiating a conversation with somebody that you don't know, I guarantee there is someone in this room that would be delighted to go with you and talk to someone new, right? Extroverts love adopting introverts. Go find one. Get adopted. They're easy to spot in a room. They make themselves known. Trust me. You can do it, though. Maybe instead of you just going up to somebody and saying, hey, do you want to grab lunch with me after this? You can go up to somebody else that you know loves that kind of thing, ask them to go to lunch with you because you already know them and have a relationship, and say, hey, can you invite that person? And they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. Who else? And they'll just start inviting people. Not all the time, but you can use the community that you have around you to be able to practice hospitality together. Also, it doesn't have to be a big group event, right? If you are an introvert, you are also uniquely equipped to help other introverts feel comfortable. You know exactly how they feel. It's not wrong for you to see somebody who looks uncomfortable in a crowd and go up to them and say, hey, listen, I've got a seat in the back corner of the balcony. It's way less overwhelming than this. People don't even come up there. It's quiet. Do you want to join me? And they'll be like, yes, please, absolutely. I want that. Right? They'll feel way more comfortable with that than they will having a swarm of outgoing people trying to invite them to 8 different things. Well, it's not wrong to invite people. As an introvert, you're uniquely equipped to care and love other introverts. So my point with all of that is this. Not every follower of Jesus is called to be the center of attention. Not every follower of Jesus is called to be a social butterfly in a room. Every follower of Jesus is called to welcome and love the stranger. That is a calling for all of us. And while I think our passage in Luke really clearly shows us an example of what it looks like to do that, of what practicing hospitality can look like, it's far from the only place in Scripture where this is talked about. this is an instruction for followers of Jesus over and over and over again. I'll throw a couple of these examples up on the screen so you don't have to turn there each time. But Romans 12, 10 through 13, it says this when talking about how to show love as followers of Jesus. It says, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. And how do you sum all of that up? He says, practice hospitality. Hebrews 13, 1 and 2 says this when talking about how, as followers of Jesus, nothing we do is meaningless. Everything has purpose. It says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. 1 Peter 4, 3 through 9 specifically comes after us introverts in the room. It says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Some of you were way more on board before that last part. But without grumbling, right? This is something that we're all supposed to be doing as an act of obedience, joyful obedience to what the Lord has called us to. So the instruction to practice hospitality is everywhere throughout the New Testament. Almost every time, actually, the concept of community or family as a body of followers of Jesus is brought up, the reminder to practice hospitality comes up in some way, shape, or form. In fact, it is such a big deal in Scripture, it's actually listed in 1 Timothy 3 as one of the requirements of being an overseer of the church. If you look at the qualifications of an elder and an overseer, it is in there. So I think every single person in this room has heard of a pastor somewhere being disqualified because of some kind of ongoing sin in their life or moral failure or whatever word people use. It comes up all the time. We hear it on the news, we hear it through the grapevine, we see it happen every year. But according to Scripture, a pastor who refuses to or does not regularly practice hospitality should also be fired for not doing that. I or Kent or any other pastor should be disqualified from leadership if we are not practicing hospitality, according to Scripture. That's a big deal, right? But I need you to hear me really clearly this morning. Practicing hospitality is not just important for the sake of being important. It's not just important to make you feel bad for not doing it. It's none of those things. Practicing hospitality is of great importance because it is of great consequence. That is something that we have to keep in mind. It's of great importance because it's of great consequence. It's not because being friends with somebody will accomplish something for you. It's not going to elevate you in society, or it's not going to be because you get something in return. That's not the point of hospitality. It's not so you gain respect or recognition or praise of people around you. The only thing that Jesus got in this passage from Luke is the ire of the crowd who could not believe that he would associate with somebody as terrible as Zacchaeus. That's the only thing that it got for Jesus. But notice what happened as a result of Jesus' hospitality towards Zacchaeus. Because of Jesus' actions, because he extended hospitality to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus was able to gain salvation that can only come from Jesus. And then, as a result of that, he turned around and he gave half of his possessions away, and he committed to give everyone that he had stolen from, he gave them back 4 times what he had taken from them. And Zacchaeus is not just virtue signaling here. He's not just doing this because Jesus is around and he wants to convince Jesus that he's actually on his team. Zacchaeus' heart was being transformed, which means the thing that he cared about was also changing. Personal gain and wealth were no longer the most important thing to him. Jesus' hospitality showed him that there was something better. And so he turned around and he said, I want to live for something better in response. Hospitality changes people. And that is why it matters so much. And the reality is this. I think the days of the church in America growing just because it's fun or cool to be at church or to call yourself a Christian, those times are either over already or rapidly coming to an end. At one part of our country's history, and probably in certain parts of our country still, the church does grow like that at times, or it has grown like that. People could encounter Jesus just because showing up to church was a fun or interesting thing to do. But I don't think I need to do a whole lot of convincing to show people here that the general public today really isn't all that interested in what it means to be a follower of Jesus. They're not too sold on that idea just for the sake of it. Christians today are often accused of being insular, of being hypocritical, of being cruel, of being exclusive, and many other things. I could go on about the things that people say. But I would actually argue that exact dynamic today is what makes hospitality so crucial for us as followers of Jesus. So Rosaria Butterfield, we're back to it, I told you we'd get there. She's an author, and she wrote a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. It is an incredibly helpful and insightful book on all of this. So just for a little bit of context for you all, Rosaria Butterfield, Christian author, she's married to a pastor, and she and her husband are, if you have not picked up on it already, they are particularly passionate about the idea of biblical hospitality. But it's not just a soapbox for her. This is not just something that she's decided was a fun talking point. She cares as much as she does about the idea of hospitality because her life was completely transformed by it. So before she became a follower of Jesus, she was a very socially and politically outspoken woman in a relationship with another woman. She was a big activist. She hated the church. She was convinced Christians were the biggest hypocrites and the most hateful, judgmental people in the world. That was like a core identity piece of hers. And she was actually working on a book that included some of those things, that she was highlighting these things. And she actually wrote an article in a popular newspaper about some of her thoughts, about just how terrible Christians were. And a local pastor in the town she lived in, named Ken Smith, reached out to her about her article, saying that he disagreed, but that he would love to have her over for dinner to just get to know her and talk to her, and just hear what she has to say, and just get to know her as a person. And she decided to go. So eventually she developed a regular rhythm of going to their house for dinner and participating in some of their weekly rhythms because, in her own words, she said if she was going to write accurately about a group of people, she basically had to do research from the inside. She was like, I cannot, as a researcher with a clear conscience, present a point on people that I have not actually asked their opinion on this point. So she entered into their regular rhythms, and then long story short, she ended up becoming a Christian as a result of this relationship. And she had this to say about the process. I love this quote. This is not going to be on screen, so just listen really carefully. So she said, "Long before I ever walked through the doors of the church, the Smith home was the place where I wrestled with the Bible, with the reality that Jesus is who he says he is, and eventually came face to face with him. Nothing prepared me for the unstoppable gospel and for the love of Jesus made manifest by the daily practices of hospitality undertaken in this one simple Christian home." Hospitality matters a lot to Rosaria Butterfield in particular. So, all that to say, in her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, she has a quote that specifically speaks so well, I think, to this idea of the need for genuine love and care and intentionality and hospitality for the people around us in the world that we live in today. So she says this. She says, "In post-Christian communities, your words can be only as strong as your relationships. Your best weapon is an open door, a set table, a fresh pot of coffee, and a box of Kleenex for the tears that spill." I love that quote so much, and I think it's such a powerful way to put to words the reality of what hospitality is. So when we practice biblical hospitality, God's people are reminded that they are not alone. They've been adopted into a family, and those who have not yet been brought into that family are shown that they are invited. That's what happens when we practice hospitality. It's for the people who already follow Jesus to be reminded of the family they've been brought into, and for the people who haven't yet experienced it to be shown that they're invited, that they are loved and they are welcome. We live in a society right now that is not interested in what you have to say unless they can see the things that you do. And if I'm being totally honest, I actually think that's okay. I do, and the reason I think that's okay, specifically for followers of Jesus, is because that's actually what Jesus and the biblical authors have been saying this whole time. Right? In John 13, Jesus tells his disciples, people will know that you follow Jesus because of how you love each other. They're going to see the way that you love each other. Matthew 5, Jesus says that people will see your good deeds and they'll glorify God as a result because they can see what you're doing. In 1 Peter 3, Peter talks about how people are going to have questions for you as a follower of Jesus about the hope that you have because they're going to see the way that you live. They're going to see your good works, and they're going to want to know. They're going to want to know why. What's going on? Why are you like this? So believe it or not, it's actually always been about how we live and not just what we say as followers of Jesus. That's always been the case. So practicing biblical hospitality is one of the primary ways that we can put the transformational love of Jesus on display to the world around us. Hospitality does not start with our ability. It does not start with our resources. It doesn't even start with our desire to show hospitality. Hospitality always starts with Jesus. Jesus' hospitality towards us is the reason for our hospitality towards others. It's the only legitimate reason for us to practice hospitality. If you look back at the last verse from our passage today in Luke, in verse 10 of our passage, it says this. It says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." He didn't come and sit back and wait for us to ask him questions. He didn't come to watch us navigate through life with the hopes that we would stumble through the doors of a church one day. He didn't come on just the hope that you would have a whim that you should try to ask more questions about, is there a God and who is he? The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And in case it isn't clear, that is every single one of us. Every single person in this room either was lost and has been saved because Jesus sought you out, or you are still lost and Jesus wants more than anything for you to be saved. And we only have access to that salvation because Jesus sought us out and invited us into his family. Because Jesus showed us hospitality. That's the only reason that we have access to that. Rosaria Butterfield, again, she put it this way. She says in Psalm 68:6, God promises to put the lonely in families and he intends to use your house as living proof. How beautiful is that? When we understand what we have received through the hospitality of Jesus, that is when we begin to understand the importance of showing hospitality towards others. Now, this does not mean that we can only show hospitality to people who seem to be miserable. That is not what I'm saying. If you are being intentional about building a relationship with somebody and they seem not to be overwhelmingly lonely or crushed, that does not mean you're not practicing hospitality. So I want you to hear me say that very clearly. You don't have to stop being friends with somebody because they seem like they're okay. That's just not the reality of it. The beauty of practicing biblical hospitality is that it puts on display the fact that we actually believe we've been brought into a family and we want other people to be a part of that family too. That is what we are doing. So one way that we do this in our house is what we call Sunday family dinner. It's not a creative name, but it is accurate. I will say it's basic, but it's true. It's exactly what it is. So there are a few people in our life that we have invited to be a part of family dinner. That is what we do. They know Sunday is family dinner. We do not invite them each week because they know where to be and they know when to be there because it's family dinner. That's what we do. We don't make an elaborate plan. We don't go crazy on a menu. We don't get all dressed up. We don't do anything fancy. More often than not, I'm wearing like sweatpants and a shirt that's probably dirty because I don't put things in the hamper like I should. But we don't do anything fancy. We just don't. We're just family together. That's what we do. And despite the super creative name, it's actually not just dinner. That's not all we do. They don't eat and leave. After dinner, we all have our roles to play because that's how families work. That's what happens. On Sunday night, I don't really do anything to speak of for Jude, our son, on Sunday nights. And that's not because I'm neglecting him. That's not because I'm being lazy. But it's because on family dinner night, somebody else does that. They help him at the table. They do his whole bedtime routine. They get him ready for bed. They pick out his books to read. He loves it. He absolutely loves it. After dinner, we clean up together. Someone loads the dishwasher while someone else cleans off the table, puts away leftovers. No one asks what to do. We don't ask anybody to do anything. No one needs to, because we have made it clear that we are family together, and so we all take responsibility to care for each other. And we do what needs to be done. And so after Jude goes to bed, we all hang out. We laugh. We sometimes play games. We watch everybody's best TikToks and Reels from the week. Then we take time to go around the room, and we have every person in the room share their high points and their low points for the week. And so we celebrate together. We laugh together. We cry together. We encourage each other. We pray for each other. We are family with each other. That is what we do. We are not entertaining anyone. We are not trying to impress anyone. That is not the point. The point is that hospitality is about understanding that we've been brought into a family and we want other people to be brought into. And so we're going to start by bringing them into ours. And part of what I love most about this is the fact that the roles of host and guest are totally interchangeable when it comes to biblical hospitality. Most weeks, I host in some capacity. I cook a meal. I prepare that for everyone. But just as often, I'm being served as a guest by the people who are taking care of my son, who are cleaning my kitchen and my table and taking care of all those other things in the house. They're actually hosting me and caring for me in those times. If they see something that needs to be done, they don't ask, they do it because it needs to be done. Right? If they see that I have had an overly tiring or difficult or taxing week, they'll just say, hey, we got dinner covered this week. We'll just bring it to your house. That happens. And all of these things did not happen immediately. They did not happen by default. It wasn't just like we flipped a switch and we were like, boom, now we have more people in our family. It didn't just immediately happen. But when we talked about it, and we talked about wanting to do this, and we wanted to have people involved in our family dinner, everyone was excited at the prospect. Everybody who's a part of it was like, that sounds great, I love it. But it still took time. It took a little bit of time to get to where it is now. It took time for everyone to actually start functioning as if we were a family, as if the things that we were saying were actually true. Sarah and I did not have a grand plan of how to go about this. We said we want to be intentional about creating space to be family. We'll see what happens. That's basically how that went. And it honestly has been one of the most impactful things in my life. And I'm served by them just as much, if not more, than the other way around. And that is one picture of what biblical hospitality can look like. It does not have to look exactly like that. That may not be a possibility for you right now, and that is okay. It doesn't have to look like this. It's not the only way it can be done. But the important thing is that it is being done. The important thing is that we are practicing hospitality. So we are going to end things today differently than we normally do. So every year around Christmas, we take time as a church to commit to a project or an organization or something that embodies the realities of what we have experienced as followers of Jesus, that embodies something about the Christmas spirit, as we'll say. So in the past, we've partnered with Carm before to provide necessities like coats, hats, and gloves, and socks and shoes. We did all of those in 1 year for people in homeless situations throughout our city. We have in a previous year, we partnered with DCS to provide Christmas presents for every child who is in the foster care system and DCS care in Knox County. We've partnered with organizations to serve vulnerable communities throughout our city. We have done all these different things. But this year, we are going to commit to showing hospitality, to showing and practicing biblical hospitality. We are committing to loving and serving and welcoming the stranger with the goal of becoming family in the same way that we have been brought in as a family through what Jesus has done for us. So we are going to be partnering with an organization based here in Knoxville. It's called Knoxville Internationals Network, or KIN for short. So KIN exists to help connect internationals in the Knoxville area to people and organizations and resources. Basically, they connect families to people that want to build meaningful relationships with them, to encourage unity, and to help people feel like they belong in a context that feels really challenging and foreign. That is what they exist to do. So for context, for anyone who is not aware, in the Knoxville metro area, there are over 45,000 internationals from over 130 different countries. That is not like in all of East Tennessee. That is not in our region. That is Knoxville metro area. These are people who are far from their homes, far from their home country in an unfamiliar context. Some relocated because they want to. Some people relocate for work or for school or for other areas. But some people are also in a refugee situation where they had to flee hardship in their home. But all of them are now in a place where they are seen by many as outsiders. That is the reality for their life. Many of them are not from English-speaking countries, which can make things even more difficult, to say the least, as they try to figure out what it looks like to live here in Knoxville. So KIN has seen the reality of this situation, and they have taken it upon themselves as an organization to help raise awareness for that, but not only raise awareness, but to step in to the reality of these people's lives and try to help show them what it means to belong. And so their vision statement, the vision statement for KIN, says that they want to see internationals in Metro Knoxville welcomed as neighbors, embraced as family, and able to enjoy lives of hope, dignity, and purpose in Christ Jesus. In short, their vision is biblical hospitality. That's what that means. And so one of the programs that KIN facilitates specifically aligns with the way that we think about hospitality and the way that we think about community here at City Church. So essentially, KIN asks for life groups within a church, not just our church, but within churches, to partner with an international family in Knoxville who has expressed an interest in being connected. And so the goal of this program is to help the family adjust and adapt to life in a new country, in a new context, and a new culture while developing meaningful friendships along the way. That's the whole point. So just think for a second how much of a pain it is for you and I to figure out whether we need to go to the DMV or the city county building or just a county clerk office for the thing that we need to do. Think about how confusing that would be if you barely spoke the language and you've also never heard of any of those places. Like, I am always confused by I hesitate to call them systems, that we have to navigate sometimes. Now imagine somebody who's never lived here. Imagine how hard it is for them. Think about how confusing it would be if you barely spoke the language and you've never even thought about what to do. What if you didn't know that different grocery stores had different prices or different sales or different items? What if you didn't know there were shopping centers with different stores where you could get all your errands done at one time unless someone showed you? What if you needed to use public transit and you had no idea that the CAT bus system has an app that makes the incredibly confusing system actually manageable? What if you had no idea that any of these things existed while you're trying to figure out how to live in a totally new place, in a totally new context, and care for your family? Ultimately, we do want to connect people with resources. We want to help them feel like they are able to navigate the systems that we have and the world that we live in and the city that we live in. But we also want to see people enter into relationship with Jesus through experiencing genuine relationships that are motivated by the gospel. We want to see that happen. So I love the way that KIN's vision is essentially just a copy and paste of what our life group system is, our life group model. It's the same. We already ask all of our life groups to function exactly like this with each other. We want our groups to be made up of people from different backgrounds, different walks of life. We want them to share life together. We encourage those people to then build relationships with the people around them in their classes, their jobs, their neighborhoods, whatever it is, with the desire to build a meaningful relationship that's motivated by the reality of the gospel. That is what our life groups are. And so this year, our goal is that we want to see all of our life groups partner together in this way to practically show biblical hospitality to people in our city who are in desperate need of being loved and served, who are treated and seen as outsiders a lot of the time with hostility instead of love and care. And that is what we want to do by putting the gospel on display through those relationships. And we hope that this is just one tangible way that we can embody the hospitality of Jesus in our city. So if you're in a life group, you're likely going to hear your leader bring it up soon, or you can bring it up with your group. We would love for you to spend time praying individually about what it looks like to be involved in that, but also we would love for you to spend time praying as a group about what that will look like for you. If you're not in a life group, we would love to invite you to join in on that aspect of hospitality first here at City Church, and then we would love for you to come alongside us as we extend that same hospitality to others. That is what we are trying to do, and that is what we want to accomplish, because that is what has been done for us. And so, as we wrap up, we're going to do what we always do at the very end, and we're going to have the communion tables open while we respond with singing. And what we do when we take communion is a physical, tangible reminder of that hospitality that we have been shown by Jesus. It's a physical reminder that Jesus came to seek and to save us, that he invited us into a family, and now that we are a part of that family, we get to extend that invitation to the people around us. We get to invite people to experience that same life that we have experienced because of what was done on our behalf. So we do that as a reminder of that reality. So I invite you, if you're a follower of Jesus, as you take communion this morning, to reflect on that reality as we respond through singing and taking communion together. But let's pray.